Welcome to God of Run. This is Will Sanchez. Thank you for tuning in. My special guest today is Diana Harmon Asher. She is the author of Sidetracked, the story of Joseph and Heather, who meet at the cross-country club and bond. I'm thrilled to have Diana as a guest.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Diana, I should have mentioned that we met actually a month ago at Roadrunners. When Roadrunners did their book review, their book club, and you were there with your son, Bobby, Betty Clark, the former president of the Van Cortlandt Track Club, up on the stage, and they did a Q&A. How exciting was that?
That was fantastic. This is my first book. I know that you're supposed to have a book launch, but I didn't really know where or how to do it. And Bobby, my son Bobby, as you know, works at the New York Roadrunners Run Center, and I went to visit him one day, and it's this beautiful open space, just very airy, and they have lots of activities there. And I just said, this would be great, because it's a book for kids, but it's about cross-country running, and they were fantastic. We decided to have a little panel so Bobby could be included in the conversation, and Betty Clark, who is just terrific. And I'm wearing my Van Cortlandt purple. So, and I'm a big fan of that club.
I agree with you about the Van Cortlandt Track Club. I adore them. They're a terrific club. And we all love Betty Clark. She's great. And I was there with the audience. Roadrunners did a beautiful job. John Phillips was the master of ceremonies.
Right, the
and
moderator.
he got a few questions in, and you got to do a little reading. And hopefully we'll have you do a little reading at the end of the show today. Oh, wow. And Bobby, Bobby Asher. Well, as you know, I had Bobby here as a guest maybe over a year ago. And he tells a story about himself that I recognize because it's in the book. So obviously Bobby is in it.
I mean, when I first started writing it, Bobby was definitely in my mind. There are similarities between Bobby and Joseph, the main character, or as I started writing, Joseph really took on his own character.
Yes,
you know, so this is not the biography of Bobby Asher.
Okay, but before we go back to the book, let's introduce you to our audience, Diana.
I grew up on Long Island in Great Neck, and both of my parents were musicians, singers, and my father was a cantor at our synagogue, and my mother was a classical singer who pretty much stopped to raise my sister and myself. I played the bass clarinet in the band, and I sang in the chorus, and there was a lot of music in our lives.
Did you participate in sporting activities as a youngster?
Not much. I think I squeaked onto the JV softball team. It wasn't a big sports town. But I had friends who ran track, and I used to tease them about it, that I didn't really get it because they just kept going around in circles over and over and over again. But actually, I spoke to one of my friends recently, and he read the book, and he said it brought back so much about cross country when he ran it, and even though they lost all the time, it was a terrible team. But I guess maybe that's stuck in my mind somewhere too when I started writing the book.
Okay, so you observed.
Yes, I'm a good spectator. I cheer well.
Okay. What college did you go into?
I went to Yale.
Oh my gosh, your parents must have been very, very happy.
Yeah, my mother was very proud. My father had passed away by then.
Sorry to hear that.
It was a great place.
Hard to get in. You have to pass recommendations, and I think you have to write an essay.
Recommendations. I was very lucky. I sort of was one of those kids where school I looked forward to it. I was organized. I did well in, and I was in the school musical and did some youth group stuff. I had stuff going on, but I think today it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder on kids today.
Speaking of Yale, there's a professor there. He wrote a little piece giving some advice to incoming freshmen. Not only at Yale, but Princeton and Harvard. I think professors from those three universities signed it. The advice was summed up in 3 words: think for yourself. It was a little bit controversial because it actually made the news because there's so much controversy going on in the schools.
Yeah.
You know, I think we lost the ability to agree agreeably or disagree agreeably. I wanted to ask you, you're much wiser now, you're years away from Yale. If you were to talk to yourself when you were going to Yale now, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I did pretty well. I think I took a lot of chances. I took my junior year abroad in London, and that sort of took some courage. So I pat myself on the back for that. I think that was good. Maybe I should have had a little more fun. I'm kind of well behaved, and you know, thinking back, maybe I should have let loose a little more.
Got to do more parties?
Yeah,
Dated that
stuff
one
like
guy
that.
or
Yeah,
whatever?
right. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I really did. I tried to get as much out of it as I could, and I was in musical groups, and you know, and that year in London was fantastic. So, but yeah, I think my only regret would be maybe that I should have loosened up a little bit.
Oh, okay. And it looks like you kept your musical going. Did you participate in any sports activity?
Really, I remember Yale has residential colleges, and I was in one called Ezra Stiles, which was one of the more modern colleges, which was right across from the gym. So I would go over there, and now they probably have much better facilities, but they had a track on the roof. And sometimes I would go over there and run on the roof when I thought no one would see me. But I did a little running.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
It's foreshadowing that.
Yeah, maybe.
That's something.
Yeah.
Okay. After college, you know, you needed to decide. You wanted to decide a career for yourself. So what was the thinking process for that?
I was interested in publishing. I thought maybe being an editor would be interesting. And at the time, there was no internet, so you couldn't search that way. I went to an employment agency, and I said I had just graduated from Yale, and they said, sit down, take a typing test, which I did, and fortunately I was really pretty good at that. And they got me a couple of interviews, and I started at Doubleday in the subsidiary rights department, which is, it was actually called performing rights. So I was dealing with anything from movie companies who were interested in Doubleday books to taking picture books and turning them into film strips and that kind of thing, which kids today, if I say film strip, they don't have any idea. You remember what film strips are, right?
Very interesting work.
It was great. It was very fun. And from there, I started meeting these people called story editors. And they work for the movie companies, and they scout books that might be good possibilities to be adapted into motion pictures. So I didn't even know that existed. Doctor, lawyer, there's this thing called a story editor, and I thought that sounded great. And someone was leaving, and they said, there's this assistant job, and I said, yes. So I started working for Columbia Pictures, and eventually, as an assistant, then I became an associate, and then I was eventually a story editor, which was a very fun job. It was a great job.
Oh, cool. So which books did you help bring to the big screen?
None really. The problem is the people who make the decisions are really in Los Angeles. So I was the New York person, and I would send a book out there and say, oh, this is fantastic. This is going to make the best movie, and they'd sort of yawn and wait until some big star wanted something. So I can't say I really accomplished that much, but it was fun.
Always read in the papers, a star falls in love with a book and they able to get it.
Yeah. Back then, they wanted to know that they had the information, but they wouldn't really act on anything that I said, which was why when I had Bobby, it wasn't that hard to leave.
Okay. Bobby, was he your first born?
Yes.
Bobby
yes,
Asher.
Right, who's at New York Roadrunners.
Roadrunners and at the Van Cortlandt Track Club, but he was one of the participants. Exciting.
Right.
He was very proud of you.
I'm proud of him too, so it's mutual.
Now, where you were sitting in Columbia, were there any famous people nearby?
Paul Newman had an office down the hall, and he didn't come in that often, but when he did, everything stopped. And he was always my favorite anyway, so I would just sort of drop everything and, So that was exciting. And
But even guys go gaga over Paul Newman.
And he was also a wonderful human being.
Really?
You know, he was one of those. I mean, I don't really know from firsthand experience. We just sort of met passing by.
Okay.
But he was he supported charities, and once he started his food company,
yes.
a lot of the profits go to.
You can tell, even if you didn't meet him, you can tell the good people from New Orleans that have
so that was
stuck-up
really
attitude. But he was really in there as a people
that
person.
was exciting.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you got pregnant with Bobby, and you had to make a decision whether to leave, and you decided to raise your family.
Yeah. I guess I just always figured I wanted to be home with with
But
children.
Obviously, that gave you experience because you write beautifully about kids. So besides raising your own family, how did you learn about the nature of teenagers, a difficult breed?
Yeah. I guess I just watched a lot. I was there and I was writing all along. I mean, one of the reasons when I left the job, I thought, well, I'll just start to write and I'll have a career as a writer. And it only took me about 30 years.
Become an overnight sensation.
Yeah, right. I took classes at Sarah Lawrence College. They have a lot of wonderful writing workshops. And it brings you into a community of writers. And, so on one hand, I was writing, and I knew I wanted to write for kids. I feel like I don't really have a grasp of being an adult like I do of looking back and observing kids. And meanwhile, you watch and you hear how kids talk, and I listened a lot.
Cool, but you also understood a lot, because it's one thing to listen a lot, but to capture, because it's still from the first person point of view. We're inside of the main character here is Joseph, and we're inside his head, which is very intimate place to be.
Yeah.
Well, you said it took you 30 years. So what kept you going? I assume you submitted stuff and you got the pink slip. I mean, the rejection.
Yeah, basically.
What kept you going?
I don't know. It's a good question. I guess most of the rejections came with, you're a good writer. We really like your writing, but. And there was always a but. A lot of either, we don't see a hook that we can sell it with, or we have something like it, or it, sometimes there were letters that were just, I just didn't fall in love with it. And you just go, well, what am I supposed to do about that? Yeah, but I felt like I could do better. Each time I would start on something else and I would try to do better.
So when did the first idea to do Sidetracked come to you?
I guess it was probably 5 years ago or so, maybe even a little longer than that. And, I would write a little bit and take it to workshops. And I always got good reactions. That was one of the things that kept me going, was that, you're with a group of people and they laugh when you want them to laugh. And, and also you have to learn to take criticism. There were times I'd bring something in and people would just say, I don't get it. Or you can write something and they'll say, well, she comes across as kind of mean. Did you mean that? And I'd say, no, I didn't mean her to be. And often you have to bounce it off people to get, it doesn't always work how it works in your head. But you have to listen, and sometimes you have to take the criticism. There are people, I think, who don't like criticism, and so they don't listen, and then they don't learn. So, you have to keep learning, I think.
Okay. So who came first, Joseph or Heather, the two main characters?
Joseph, but I always sort of had an idea about a girl like Heather. And when I was watching the Olympics, the 2008 Olympics, and there was this little tiny story about this young woman, Stephanie Brown-Trafton, an American who won a gold medal in discus. And it was just sort of like a little throwaway story, and I just remember thinking, well, that's not fair. They don't spend any time on her, and then they spend hours and hours on the gymnasts, who are wonderful. But I thought, there's in society, if you're a big, strong woman, which I'm not, I'm a little person, but watching it, I just thought, how unfair. Like, if you're a big, strong girl, you should have someone to look up to like that, and it's not covered, it's thrown away. So that's sort of how I came to Heather.
Heather's strong.
She's big and
large.
she's strong, and she loves Stephanie Brown Trafton, who no one has heard of.
I had Bobby here, and he said that he had either ADD or ADHD.
ADD, yeah.
He had ADD.
Yeah.
Attention deficit disorder.
Right.
Which your main character, Joseph, has. So obviously a little bit of Joseph, as this little Bobby, and in fact one of the stories that you tell in the book is the same story that Bobby tells of himself.
Not really hearing things correctly, such as when my dad was the coach of my first basketball team, he said, make sure that you do not let that ball out of your sight and guard anyone who's got the ball.
Right.
Naturally, I took that as guard anyone who has the ball, even if they're on my team.
Defense. And I guess that's part of, I would get inside a kid's head, and there are things we take for granted as adults that we sort of jump over the explanation. It's important to play defense, but we don't say it's important to play defense against the other team. So how is a little kid supposed to know that? If you're, some kids do, some like sort of natural born athletes, they just get it. They get that it's them and there's us.
Right.
But to a kid like Joseph, and really to a kid like Bobby, you have to explain those things. It's not fair to assume that the kids are going to understand.
Okay. That's one of those observations you made, because you write beautifully about
thank
Joseph.
you. I try.
Is there a little bit of you in Joseph?
Well, it's funny. What happened was, after all of these writing workshops, there were a couple of people who I kind of picked out, who I really liked their writing. I really liked them as people, and we formed our own little writing group. And they helped so much with this. Just once you have people you really trust and you can get their feedback, it helps enormously. And I was talking to my friend Mackenzie. I said, I think it was after the book was chosen by a group of independent booksellers, as they called it, Indies Introduced. So it was one of their favorite debut novels, children's novels of the year.
Excellent.
So I went to the book expo and I got to do a little reading, and everyone was being really nice, and I got to sign it, which was the first time. And I had always sort of imagined, what would it be like to have a book and have people ask for your signature? And I said to her, what if that was like the pinnacle? What if it's all kind of disappointing after this? And she looked at me and she said, you're Joseph. That's such a Joseph thing to say. And I thought, I guess you're right. I guess I do have a lot of that in me, this sort of worrying, anticipatory anxiety and worrying. And I do worry a lot. So, I think there is a lot of me in Joseph, really, even though on the outside, I didn't have his learning problems. I didn't really have his social problems, except that we all do, really. We all feel kind of, even now, I will go to a wedding and think, I'm wearing the wrong thing, and everybody else knows how it's supposed to be except me.
Okay.
There's some of me in Joseph.
Okay. And then the coach is Mrs. T, a woman's coach, which is probably unusual. In fact, the book is entirely unusual. No cliches in it. It's unexpected. It's a very fresh reading. So is Mrs. T based on several characters?
Mrs. T, there was Nancy Tannenbaum was a wonderful woman who was one of Bobby was in the resource room, and she was one of the teachers. And again, it's not her exact, but I named her after Mrs. T because she was just a wonderful teacher, and that kind of, she would encourage the kids just so strongly, and had a great sense of humor.
Was Mrs. Tannenbaum a track coach or a cross-country coach?
I think she talked about, she wasn't at Edgemont where Bobby went, but I think she had been, and she had been a runner.
Because you mentioned that Olympian. So this is occurring in the 1990s?
That was 2008. I figure it's the present day.
Present day.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
there's
she
no politics in
would've-
it, but just, you really have to look hard, to figure out what year it was.
Well,
But you
it's funny.
mentioned
When
the
I
Olympics.
started writing it, there's also Grandpa, and he goes to Atlantic City. And in my first draft, I had him say he's not happy with the trip. And I have him say, they took us to the Trump, and I hate the Trump. And then all of this happened, and I said to my editor, well, first of all, they closed the Trump. But I said, I don't know. And she said, I don't think any mention of Trump should be in such a sweet book anyway.
That's right.
I axed
I
that.
agree. The only ages that I mentioned, I think the grandpa you mentioned, he's 79. Everybody else, you sort of have to guess. Oh, they're the teenagers, obviously.
Yeah.
But you weren't sure they were 12 or 14.
Well, they're 12. They're in 7th grade.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah, 12 or 13.
Okay. So I love the cover.
I do
And
too.
of course, this is, Joseph, they're chasing, I guess that's the bumblebee?
Yeah, that's
The very is
a bee.
Sidetracked.
Yeah.
So how did the cover come about?
The publisher did the cover, and they sent me a first draft, and I loved it. And I asked about the color because I said, a track is really more of a tomato red.
Yeah.
And they said they tried that, but this just kind of popped on the
Yeah,
shelf, which it
definitely.
seems to do. So I
And
said,
you-
okay. And the title, it was originally, first I called it Personal Record because I thought that the idea of a personal record in cross country was one of the things that makes cross country really special. And they wanted something catchier, and I was going through Google with everything having to do with running, and I just couldn't come up with it. And one of the other editors at Abrams said, "How about Sidetracked?" And I just went,
Perfect.
that's it. That's the word I've been looking for. So he's running track, and he's sidetracked because of the ADD, and he's heading that way when everybody else is heading that way.
Yeah.
And it just worked, and they did a great job.
They did it. Do you have a section you want to read?
I thought it would be fun to just read the part where he's just going to the track for the first time. He's looked down on the track because it was just built, and it's before school. He's a little early, and he wants to just try out the track and see what it's like. Surrounding the track is a waist-high chain link fence. It's unlocked, so I open the gate and step in. The track smells just like it looks, all rubbery and new. Its surface makes me think of the sponge painting we did in 2nd grade art. I almost expect it to squish and ooze red when I press down. I wonder if Mrs. T knows all this. I bet she does. I lift my heels and bob up and down, then I bend my knees and lay my hands flat to get a better feel. I always like to know how things feel. There's even a name for it. Mrs. T says I'm a tactile learner. I hear a voice, a girl's voice. When I look up, I see it's the new girl from PE. Friedman, right? She says. I say. It's a pretty simple question. You are Friedman, right? Yes. I don't like being called Friedman. Any sentence that starts with Friedman usually ends with an order or hysterical laughter. I stand up and brush my hands off on my pants. What were you doing? Trying out the track? You're supposed to run on it, not do handstands, she says. Not in an unnice way, but maybe she's just warming up. I wanted to see how it felt, I say. You joining the track team? I don't know. Are you? I might. Aren't you playing soccer, I ask? She looks annoyed. I feel like I've said the wrong thing. I hope she doesn't beat me up. I don't really like soccer. I went to soccer camp last year. The girls get mean, and then they end up hating you. Just for a second, she looks different, a little sad. I think about what my mother said, how it can't be easy for her being better than the boys, and a ton better than the other girls. I wonder if you can be as miserable being good at something as you can being bad at it. Maybe things are reversed somehow when you're a girl. Do you have a first name, she asks me? Joseph. I forget to ask hers, but she tells me anyway. I'm Heather, she says. We just moved here. Where from? A place called Cherryfield, Maine, she says. That must be pretty different from New York. She nods. It's the blueberry capital of the world. Wow, I say. Aren't you going to ask? Ask what? Why it's called Cherryfield and not Blueberry Field. Should I? No, she says, not really. It's just that everybody does. She reaches down to touch her toes. I'm allergic to blueberries, I tell her. I get itchy way back in my throat. I demonstrate my scratching technique by sticking my finger in my ear, wiggling it around, and making a clucking sound with the back of my tongue. This is probably not something you should do on first meeting. So why is it, I ask her. Why is what? Why is it called Cherryfield if it's the blueberry capital of the world? Oh, because there used to be cherries before the blueberries. Then she says, you want to run? Run? She moves her arms and legs in a running motion. Run on the track now? I'm slow, I say. After gym class, I'm not expecting Usain Bolt. Who? I ask, but she's already off bounding along like there's nothing to it. She's a quarter of the way around the oval before I even start running. When I finally get going, I'm surprised by how the track feels hard and soft at the same time, kind of cushiony. It makes me try tiny steps and then bigger steps and even a jump. Then I try zigzagging across the lines, out and back, holding out my arms to feel the air go by. Heather's running straight and fast, and she doesn't even slow down when she goes around the curve. She makes it look fun and easy, so I take the middle lane and try running the same way. There's something about the painted lines all clean and sharp that dares me to go faster, and I speed up for about 10 seconds until I'm out of breath and have to stop. Heather comes around and passes me, but then she stops for a second to look at something in the grassy field in the middle of the track. It's a cement circle about the size of a kiddie pool. I walk over to where she's standing and she says, that's the discus ring. She points to the other side of the field. Shot put's over there. Oh, I squeak out, that's about all the breath that's left in there. I'm doing shot put in the winter, and in spring I'll do discus, like Stephanie Brown-Trafton. Who? Stephanie Brown-Trafton. She won the gold medal for discus throw in the 2008 Olympics. I'm about to say, really? But then I think it must be a trap. I know from experience that kids say things that sound logical, and then I go, really? And then they laugh their heads off because it's not true at all. Now that I think about it, she might have made up the whole Cherryfield thing, too. So even though I'm out of breath and lightheaded and shaky, this time I see it coming. I've never even heard of this Stephanie whoever. I put on a yeah, sure kind of voice and say, if she really won a gold medal, I bet I would have heard of her. Yeah, says Heather, and she takes a step towards me. Well, maybe nobody's heard of her because she's not what people want to see. She's 6'4" and 200-something pounds, and she throws things farther than most guys. Everybody wants to cheer for the little gymnasts and pretty volleyball players in bikinis. Maybe that's why nobody's heard of her, even though she won an Olympic gold. Heather is now about 5'10" of angriness, but she's blinking her eyes in a way that reminds me of me when I'm trying not to cry. I want to tell her I'm sorry, that I didn't mean to hurt her feelings. I just thought she was trying to make me look stupid like everybody else. But I don't have a chance. She shakes her head and starts to run again, much faster than I can go. At the end of the track, she crashes through the chain link gate and takes the cracked stairs back up, 2 at a time, and she's gone.
Beautiful. I hope
Thank you.
there's a story editor out there that will pick this up and we'll have the new Wonder Years.
Who knows? Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.